Welcome to the Work Well, Live Well podcast. I'm your host, Leanne. Drawing on the foundations of wellbeing science and positive psychology, I share tools, tips and strategies for people to intelligently manage their wellbeing so they can flourish into working well and living well. Today's guest is Dr. Michelle McQuaid. Michelle is a best-selling author, workplace wellbeing teacher and playful change activator. With more than a decade of senior leadership experience in large organisations around the world, she's passionate about translating cutting-edge research from positive psychology and neuroscience into practical strategies for health, happiness and business success. An honorary fellow at Melbourne University's Graduate School of Education, she blogs for Psychology Today, Huffington Post and Live Happy, and her work has been featured in Forbes, the Harvard Business Review, the Wall Street Journal, Boss Magazine, The Age and more. She holds a Master's in Applied Positive Psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and has completed her PhD in Appreciative Inquiry under the supervision of Professors David Cooperrider and Celeste Wilderom. Michelle lives to help people discover their strengths, move beyond their fears and finally discover what it truly takes to flourish with confidence. So let's get started. Michelle, thanks so much for joining me today. This is such an honour for me as you have provided mentorship to me, and you are, as we were discussing before, my Marty Seligman of positive psychology.
Those are big shoes to fill, Leanne.
Well, I hold you in the highest regard. So thanks
you
so much. In December 2019, you and your team conducted the Perma Workplace Survey, developed by Dr. Peggy Kern at the University of Melbourne. And the survey was designed to help employees and their organisations better understand the factors supporting and undermining wellbeing in the workplace. What were some of your key findings here, and what were the most common challenges for workers?
Yeah, I mean, the common challenges, it was really interesting. We gave them a whole list of challenges that they could choose from. And overwhelmingly, like 31.8% of the sample said mental health. Biggest challenge. We were really surprised because there are things in that physical health came in at 26.6%, managing money at home at 23.9% in the sample. So there are all sorts of things, dealing with change at work, caring for people at home, huge variety, but mental health was really the number one thing that workers were finding they were struggling with most. And perhaps that's reflective of what the key finding was for us out of this survey. It was the third time we conducted research like this. We did it back in 2018 with 1,000 Australian workers. We did it in the US in 2019, and then this group in December 2019 again in Australia. And one of the findings that kept popping out for us was a question that we were asking. It was really just it was an afterthought the first time that we added it, but we were worried that so often wellbeing is measured on a single continuum as something you either have or you don't. And while we absolutely get the genesis of that question, it's more complicated than that for most of us, right? It's a little bit more messy. And so we were inspired by a question from Professor Corey Keyes, who had been measuring over the last decade the idea that you could have mental health on one continuum, but mental ill health on the other continuum. So could I have, for example, bipolar disorder, but still have mental health, be living well with that bipolar disorder if I'm, taking medication and I'm getting the support that I need and I'm making good choices? We know that that's absolutely a reality for people. So we'd added this question around, when it comes to your wellbeing over the last month, are you feeling on top of the world? Are you really struggling? Are you not feeling bad but just getting by? Or are you living well despite struggle? And so we started to think about wellbeing a bit like Corey had, a continuum of thriving and a continuum of struggle, and to see what was happening for workers. And so the big aha for us in December December was again to see this same data now come out, more than 3,000 people, different countries, different time periods, showing us that workers who are high in thriving, so they're telling us that they're feeling on top of the world, we call this consistently thriving, or they're living well despite struggle. So they're higher in the thriving continuum. They're saying, yeah, I've got the knowledge and the tools and the support to look after my well-being. It didn't matter how much struggle they were experiencing. They could have a little bit of struggle or a whole lot of struggle, but their outcomes statistically were the same when it came to things like their engagement at work, their job satisfaction, their performance, their commitment to their organisation. Statistically, these two groups almost identical. Whereas for those workers who are lower in thriving, even if they were low in struggle, like our not feeling bad, just getting by people, there was a statistically significant drop in all those kind of workplace outcomes, and perhaps not so surprising, those workers who are really struggling even further behind again. So it's really beautiful, that well-being comprises both thriving, our ability to feel good and function effectively, but also our ability to navigate wherever we are on struggle, and that it's possible to thrive and struggle at the same time.
Do you think it's having that understanding of what it is that helps us to thrive, that helps us to get through that?
Yeah, definitely seen that way. People who were consistently thriving, so they're high in thriving and low in struggle, and people who are living well despite struggle, so they're high in thriving and high in struggle. One of the things that differentiated these two groups from the rest of the sample was that they reported again statistically significant higher levels of feeling able to care for their well-being, feeling motivated around looking after their well-being, but also feeling higher levels of psychological safety so they could talk about their struggles when their well-being perhaps wasn't quite going the way they wanted. And so Dr. Peggy Kern has called this, they had the way power, they had the ability to do it, they had the willpower, the motivation to do it, but they also had the we power. And I think we definitely find this in workplace settings, that I can know a whole lot about caring for my well-being, I can be as motivated as all heck, but if I show up to work each day with a group of people who aren't really interested in caring for well-being, they're emailing me late at night, there's always cake for, morning tea, we spend a lot of time sitting in long meetings rather than ever taking working meetings, there's a lot of political game playing that undermines our relationships and the like, then I can know as much about caring for my well-being and be as motivated as one person can be, but the system around me is going to have an impact on my well-being as well. And so this is where I think this understanding about our we power, that well-being is absolutely contagious. It ripples through us, as we've seen in other research, like the big Framingham heart study that Nicholas Christakis and his colleagues did a few years ago. It matters as well. So it's no good teaching us individually to be well if we can't also collectively be well together.
Yeah, and I really love that concept, way power, willpower, we power. It really ties it in really nicely, doesn't it? And helps build that picture of how we can support ourselves and others.
Yeah, absolutely.
And really, build on that psychological safety. In March this year, again, with the help of Dr. Peggy Kern, the Wellbeing Lab created an additional set of questions to gauge the levels of concern about the impact of the bushfires, coronavirus, and the economy here in Australia on workplace wellbeing and performance. What were some of your key findings here?
Yeah, this was so interesting. So we'd done the research in December 2019, thinking that, we'll come back late February, we'll release those findings to market. And of course, then life happened. And Australian workers first faced bushfires, then coronavirus. And then we measured just after talk started about shutting down the economy, but people were still at work. So they weren't quite in lockup at that point for non-essential businesses. So it was just before that moment happened. And we were really curious, so when struggle hits, how do we respond and what impact does it have on our well-being and our performance at work, because both matter, right, in a work context for us. There were two big ahas out of that. Firstly, that pattern we saw still held. We still saw people who were high in thriving. They were still much more likely statistically to be getting better outcomes on performance and engagement, job satisfaction, commitment to their workplace, regardless of how much their level of struggle had changed. And again, overall for Australian workers, we saw that 81% of workers at that time in March were saying their levels of struggle had increased significantly since the start of 2020, which kind of makes sense. What was interesting though is that our people who were consistently thriving, those people who told us they'd been feeling on top of the world, low struggle, high thriving, they had started to significantly decline when it came to their performance at work. Now, they were still doing better than the just getting by people and the really struggling people, but we started to see a bit of fragility that perhaps now, having moved out of, one of our colleagues said, well, they've been swimming in the Wellbeing paddling pool in the backyard, and now they've suddenly been thrown into the deep blue ocean, Yeah. And so some of that fragility around their well-being was starting to show. Now, we'll go back and measure again in the next few months and see kind of how bad did that impact them or what happened. It was always an interest we had about, are our living well despite struggle people, those who are high in thriving and high in struggle, is there something about resilience that these people are teaching us that the rest of us miss? So that was number one. The other really interesting finding, it won't surprise you at all to hear that for a lot of the participants, they were reporting quite high levels of anxiety around the impact of the bushfires, the impact of coronavirus, the impact of economy. We asked them to rate that on a scale of 0 to 10, not anxious at all to feeling very anxious. There were some that were a bit more chilled and relaxed down the not so anxious end of the scale. There was some kind of sitting in the middle, not sure how bad this is going to be for me or not at that point. And then we had some very anxious. Now, when you group them into these 3 different groups, and then you ask them about how their performance is going at work, and a number of other questions, you start to consistently see this very U shape in the results. So people with a little bit of anxiety and people with a lot of anxiety about these things were actually performing just as well at work. The people who were struggling the most when it came to their performance at that time were the people who were in that mid-level. It's almost like they don't have the fight or flight kind of response going enough yet.
Yeah.
Kind of spark the mouse. What am I going to do about this? I've got to reach for my resilience and my optimism right now. It's kind of like, is it urgent? Is it a disaster yet? Maybe I'll go and have a nap in bed and see what it looks like tomorrow. I don't know what was going on for them. But you definitely see this U shape. And I just think it's a really important message for us again, that anxiety in and of itself is not necessarily a problem for our well-being or performance. Yeah, it's knowing what to do with that anxiety and being able to turn it into intelligent and constructive action for ourselves and others that actually makes the difference here. And I think that's so important, because so often these days we get messages pumped to us that anxiety is bad, we shouldn't struggle. And yet, as we all know, these are the things that help us to learn and to grow and to become more resilient. And so maybe we need to have a little more confidence and faith in ourselves to deal with the difficult stuff rather than getting anxious about being anxious so often.
That anxiety piece is just so very relevant for so many at the moment, and there's that feeling can be quite scary for many, and when we have that understanding of how that shows up in us and how we can manage it is very empowering.
It's hugely empowering. I think, one of the big ones I always remember Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener talked to me about, all those uncomfortable emotions. Think of them like an old-fashioned phone that used to sit in our hallways when you and I were growing up, I'm sure, Leanne. And, it would ring, and even before answer machine phone days, not to date myself too much, but the only way you knew what the message was going to be was if you picked it up, And I think about those feelings of stress or anxiety for us. It's like that old-fashioned phone inside us ringing, saying, hey, there's something important here. I need you you to know. It's my body's way of saying something here needs your attention that matters to you right now. And so we have to pick up that anxiety phone or that stress phone or that anger phone or frustration or fear, whatever it might be, and listen to those messages. It's why it feels so uncomfortable in our body. It's our body's way of getting our attention to say, hey, something here matters and you need to look at this. The other big aha for me in the years of doing the research and podcasting stuff I've been doing was the research of Dr. George Bonanno, who studies resilience. And he said to me, you know what, we're actually wired for resilience. Like the bulk of the time, the research shows we are wired for resilience. And I wish I'd known that earlier, because then every time that phone rang, I wouldn't have been quite so panicked about trying to take it off the hook, disconnect it, pull it out from the wall, let it ring out, nobody home to hear this message. But to pick it up and go, okay, what do I need to know? And what can I reach for in my experiences or the people around me who support me to be able to deal with this message of anxiety instead of trying to pretend that it's not happening? So I think we underestimate our own resilience a lot of the time to deal with what's stressing us out. And then we get stressed about the feeling of the stress.
Yeah. Oh, yes, so much. In terms of psychological safety, Michelle, as we find ourselves in a uniquely challenging environment, do you see a shift in organisations giving permission to struggle or normalising that experience in organisations?
Look, I think a little and not enough yet is the answer to that. We saw in the March results that only 1 out of every 10 workers felt that it was really safe to talk about their struggle at work. And that's a problem, that's a massive problem, because we are all struggling some of the time. The only question is whether we feel safe enough to talk about it and whether we're learning and growing from those struggles together. I think the unexpected gift of this moment in so many workplaces is that we are all struggling universally. And so talking about struggle has become a little more normalized right now. And my heartfelt hope is that we take that even a step further and intentionally get people to talk about, hey, what's working well? Where are you struggling? What are we learning from this moment? How can we help each other? And to me, that's a psychologically safe conversation. I was very lucky. Professor Carol Dweck gifted me with those questions in a conversation we had a number of years ago, and I've never looked back. And the reason I love those questions, like what's working well, let's start with the strength. Let's feel safe. Even in our worst moments, something is working. Let's not lose those things. But then also let's talk about the struggle. Even in our best, most stiff upper lip moments, there'll still be struggle in there. Let's talk about that and make it okay. And most importantly is what we're learning. Like most of our outcomes, good or bad, are relatively short-lived at the end of the day. But what we take forward is the learning. So how can we feel psychologically safe to keep learning and growing together? And how do we support and help each other through those times? So I think, look, there's an unexpected gift in this moment. Struggle suddenly became something we're all going through. But I think in many cases, we still lack the questions or the skills to be able to lean into those psychological safe conversations with each other. And so my hope is we get better at doing that off the other side of this experience.
And something that's always stuck with me from a very wise mentor, hint, hint, was taking the lesson and the opportunity from situations. And that is something that has really stuck with me. And there's so much opportunity to learn and grow from what we're going through right now.
Absolutely. The unexpected gifts, as you know, I like to call it. They're maybe not the gift you wanted. You maybe got it and you're like, what am I going to do with that? And you shoved it in a drawer in case somebody came over to visit and you had to produce it again. But perhaps over time, it's proved more useful than you might have imagined. And so I do think even in our most challenging of moments, there are unexpected gifts to be had.
Another question I have around organisations, after being part of Collective Insights recently, there was talk about organisations really paying attention to employees' wellbeing now, perhaps more than ever before. Yeah. So do you see this is something that might stick as we transition into a new way forward? Do you think there'll be a higher sense of psychological safety as we move forward?
Look, I hope so. I think the challenge pre all of this was, although people recognise that caring for workers' wellbeing was a good thing to do, an important thing to do, we were often too busy to really fit in these things. Too busy to have the workshops or the coaching, too busy to follow through, and too busy to make this a standing agenda item. And I think suddenly now it's become the most important conversation in many, many workplaces. And that is the unexpected gift of this time, right? I think right now everybody is suddenly interested in caring for their well-being and picking these things up, and that's fantastic. I think there's a danger always that well-being becomes a tick-the-box exercise. We did that, we learned about it, and now we've gone back to what we were doing before. And so I think the question becomes, how do you embed it more into the way we're working each day? So it's not an add-on, it's not an afterthought, it's not that thing we did during COVID-19, but becomes part of the way we're being. And that I still think my jury's a little bit out as to what's going to happen for organisations. I think there's also a massive piece here about how do we deal with ongoing change. And in the research we've done actually as part of our Change Lab group, we've found that our ability to successfully create change in workplaces and workers' wellbeing is absolutely intertwined. One impacts the other and you can't separate the two. The more well workers are, the more successful change is. The more successful change is, the more well workers are. So I do think that there's another opportunity still in front of us as we start to transition back. We may have to then transition back into, non-essential businesses being closed for a while. We just don't know how the next 18 months really play out, other than the fact there's going to be masses of uncertainty and probably still a good bit of change ahead of us. And so I think to the extent we can help connect these two conversations, because so often in workplaces, change might be dealt with by the strategy group, you might have a change group, or it's dealt by leaders, kind of project by project, but it's not often on those change projects there's a line item that says well-being. And so I do think there's a chance here to connect the dots so that this just isn't seen as it was relevant while we were all worried about catching coronavirus, but we've all looked after our well-being now, so now let's get busy and go back to the way things were.
Yeah. What advice do you have for workers and their well-being at this time?
Yeah, look, I think tiny experiments are what can have a big impact for all of us. And I think it's not even just true of this time, but I think it's particularly important at this time because people are a little exhausted, right? We've been grieving a world that we knew that is now gone. We're often missing colleagues. We're sitting in a lot of uncertainty that chews up a lot of our energy. And so our capacity mentally, emotionally, physically to take on more things is, I just think, much more narrowed in right now. So tiny experiments are actually always the best way to care for our well-being, but particularly topical now. And so I love the work of Professor BJ Fogg. He has a great book out, came out late last year in December, called Tiny Habits. And he talks about the fact that, tiny things that we can successfully do and celebrate are the best way to change any behaviours, be it around our well-being or anything else. And yet so often we think if it's not big, it doesn't matter. And so right now, finding want-to things, like it doesn't matter what you do to care for your well-being, as long as you do something and it's something you want to do, which makes it more likely for you to stick with. So if that's getting out for a walk each day, or it's trying to get regular sleep, or it's making time to connect virtually with the people that you love all over the world, or it's finding a new way to use your strengths each day, or it's creating little jolts of joy, whatever you want to do, number one, so that it's something you're more likely to stick with. And then shrink that change right down if you can to something that takes you 30 seconds or less. So, it might be if you're trying to get out to walk each day, that your tiny habit is just putting on your shoes and then declaring success. You don't even have to go anywhere. That's enough. That was the 30 seconds. And the most important part, his research and other behaviour change researchers are finding, is the celebration part. It's the declaring the success. And ideally you want that somatically physical kind of feeling about woohoo. I think we miss too many opportunities in life to take our victory laps. And yet if you look at every successful sporting team, they will have some victory ritual, somatic, like throw the hands up in the air, pull the shirt over their head, something that they're doing, right? And so what we know is so often with behavior change, we don't immediately celebrate. And it can be authentic. Your woohoo might be a more internal one, a gentle smile, an imaginative high five with yourself, but we have to celebrate. And so doing that helps us then the next time that cue comes up to try our little habit, the alarm goes off or something happens in the morning, to go, oh yeah, that was a good feeling. I want to do that again. And that gets repetition. And the more repetition, the more we start to build those well-being muscles to not just put the shoes on, but maybe get down to the front door. And maybe the next day it's to the end of the walk. And the day after that, it's around the block. But it grows over time. And so just tiny experiments. And again, using those questions, what went well with it? Where did I struggle? What did I learn? What will I try tomorrow? So that we're becoming more active and intelligent participants in shaping our well-being day by day is really the key to being able to care for ourselves and have the energy to care for others as well.
And actually, that's a great lesson that I learned earlier this year. I was part of your Wellbeing challenge that you run, and my goal was to ride my bike to work, actually, which I achieved, and after had a very sore backside for days. But I was extremely proud of myself for doing that. But the reality was that my enthusiasm to do it again was not that high. So
understandably.
But I have still managed to ride my bike. But what I have done to achieve that sense of achievement is changing the distance that I ride, so that I'm getting that exercise, I'm feeling good, getting the air in my lungs and getting things churning within my body to feel really good, but I'm not overexerting myself so that I feel disenchanted to do it again. So
absolutely. I think this is such an important one, because we think in order to be well, we have to go big and all out there.
Yes.
And, look, over time, awesome, knock yourself out, but start tiny. Tiny is mighty in this case. And experiment and play with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to be showing up and trying, and you will figure it out. But we set too big a goals and we expect perfection too quickly. And then we beat ourselves up for not having willpower and self-regulation. And look, increasingly we're understanding perhaps those are not the drivers of this, but it's the ability to experiment and find joyful ways that we're willing to stick with that make all the difference.
So as we are getting towards the end of this great interview, besides your own books and podcasts and your wonderful community, do you have a book or a TED talk or a gem of advice that you would recommend to people listening today?
Yeah, look, I'll give you two. I recently read Untamed last week, actually, by Glennon Doyle Melton. She's a US author. She's not a researcher at all. She's very kind of left of field for the stuff that I would normally read, but it was just beautiful. It's beautifully written, and it's a call to us to unleash, the people we are meant to be. So I highly recommend that. But if there was a gem of advice, it would be this: that you were made perfectly imperfect, and that is just as it should be. Yep, I think so often we feel that need to have it all figured out, to have all the answers. We think everybody else got it sorted. It's just us that didn't. Somehow we missed the memo, or we didn't get blessed with that. And the more I've come to understand in my life that nature made us each perfectly imperfect and equipped us with those high levels of resilience so that we can learn and grow and thrive as we get better at doing things in more intelligent ways with each other. And that is just as it should be. Man, did it take the pressure off. I remember Carol Dweck at one point said to me, "Congratulations, Michelle, you're human just like everybody else. Now take a load off." And I was like, that is a load off, Carol. Thank you so much. And it was just one of the greatest gifts to go, okay, I screwed it up, I made a mistake, and I'm human just like everybody else. Welcome to the world. So you are made perfectly imperfect, just like me, and just like everybody else around you. And thank goodness, right? Because that's what makes this life magical for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheryl, finally, how are you taking care of your well-being?
Yeah, look, again, trying to be gentle, and just really trying to tune in each day. Like, how am I doing? Like anybody else, I definitely have days where the uncertainty, the sadness of watching what's happening for people around the world, the sadness for people I know, watching my kids, missing out on things that they had their hearts set on in terms of school and friends and that. There are definitely days where I'm not feeling on top of the world. I would say I much more live well despite struggles. So just being honest with yourself, with the people around you about that, I think makes a huge difference. And on the weekend, I'm in Toronto, as you know, at the moment. And so we had the first bit of real warm sun, coming out the back of winter. And we've got a deck that overlooks a bit of a forest on the back. And so Saturday afternoon, I pulled out the old outdoor couch. I stripped the waterproof cover off it. I got down there with a blanket in the sun and a book, and I read and I napped. And it was just the most joyful way to care for my well-being. So permission to rest and recover as we need, I think, is so important right now.
That sounds like a beautiful way to take care of your well-being.
It was good. I'm planning to head back there.
And I love the sun. It's beautiful. It makes me feel so nice. Shell, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm sending you the most warmest virtual hug. The last time I saw you, you gave me a beautiful hug, and I'm sending that back to you today. And thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, well, thank you. The hug's coming right back at you through the Zoom lens. And thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for what you're doing, putting these conversations out into the world. I know it takes courage and huge energy, and we're also grateful that this is how you're choosing to show up for us.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me. To find out more about Michelle, visit thewellbeinglab.com. There you'll find her books and links to her fantastic podcast and resources for making positive psychology work. If you found this podcast of benefit, please share it with someone you think will benefit too. I love to receive your feedback and would be grateful if you could rate this podcast on iTunes. And I invite you to connect with me through LinkedIn and Facebook. Until next time, wishing you well-being. Bye for now.